Good afternoon. My name is Daphne Lazar-Price, and I'm the Executive Director at JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. In preparation for Purim, we are hosting a webinar, and it is my privilege to introduce Rabbi Eryn London, who is the JOFA UK Scholar in Residence. Rabbi London received smicha from Yeshivat Maharat and is chaplain boards and has chaplain board certification of Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. And she's lectured in Israel, Australia, Colombia, Canada, the UK, and the US. A little bit about what we're about to hear. Our webinar is titled Esther, a woman with different, it's a webinar about Esther, and it's titled Esther, the woman of many names and many backgrounds. Esther is a woman with different names, an unclear relationship history, and an interesting origin story. And together, we will take a look at some of the Talmudic and Midrashic sources to get a better picture of who this heroine was. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Rabbi London.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. It's evening here, nice and cold. So together we're gonna learn a little bit or a lot about Esther and who she was and where she came from. Not so much about what she was doing in this space. And so we're just gonna jump in, and if you do have questions, please feel free to send them in the chat, or I guess that would be the easiest way, to send a chat question, and I will hopefully see them and answer as soon as I can or towards the end of the lecture. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with the source sheet, which will get uploaded later after we're finished learning together. So we learn about Esther a little bit in the book of Esther, in Megillat Esther, and it says, "V'hi amenat Hadassah, hi Esther bat Dodo, ki en la'av ve'em, v'na'ara yafat toar v'yafat mar'eh, u'be'emot avia v'ima lechka Mordechai lo lebat." He was a foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. So here we see in Esther that she has multiple names. She's not only known as Esther, she's also known as Hadassah. We learn from here that her parents died, and that she went to go live with her uncle, who is Mordechai, and Mordechai saw her as his own daughter. The Gemara in Masechet Megillah comes to talk about this and says, Ki'en la'av ve'em, right? So what does this mean? That she didn't have her father and mother, and when her father and mother died, right? Why do we need to have both of those lines together? Wouldn't that make a lot of sense? We don't need both of that. So why does it say it again? Rav Acha says, when her mother became pregnant with her, her father died, and when she was born, her mother died. And when her father and mother died, Mordechai took her for his daughter. Atana taught in the in the name of Rabbi Meir, do not read for daughter, but rather for the house. For house, i.e. his wife, right? So here the Gemara already is trying to pick apart who Esther is. If you look at, I have a lot of quotes here from Masechet Megillah 13a. If you look at that page, basically the whole page is about Esther and her story and her storyline. So it's a really good page to get to know a little bit more about Esther. So here we hear from the rabbis that it's actually that Esther never got to know her parents. Her father died before she was born, and as she was born, her mother died, and so she was immediately taken into Mordechai's house. Now, and Mordechai then took her to be his daughter. That's one opinion. And then there's this opinion that actually it was not. He took her in to be his wife. And we'll see that played out in other Midrashim, which I didn't bring all of them. And that goes into the question of, well, then how could Esther been with Achashverosh? Wasn't this adultery? How does all of that work out into the story? And so we can see from here that it's not totally clear of where she's coming from. And based on where we think her background is, it's actually going to change the storyline from where we are. Okay, so We're going to continue on. It's still on this page on 13a. You can see it right here, where my mouse is. So, and he brought up Hadassah. So now the Gemara is going to try and come and teach us different reasons of why she might have these different names and what these names can come to teach us about Esther and her personality. As we know, names are important and they can teach us something about a person. They have an influence on us and our being. And so here we say we have Hadassah. She's called Hadassah, but she is called Esther. As been taught, Rabbi Meir says Esther was her proper name. So that was her real name, and Hadassah was almost her nickname. So then why was she called Hadassah? So according to Rabbi Meir, as the righteous who are called myrtles, Hadassim, and so it says, and he stood among myrtle trees. So according to Rabbi Meir, the reason why she has the name Hadassah is because it was about her nature. She was a righteous person, and so she was going to be related to righteousness every time we would mention her name. Rabbi Yehuda actually says otherwise. Hadassah was her real name. It wasn't Esther. So then why was she called Esther? Because she concealed, masteret, the facts about herself. As we know, it says Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, right? So potentially it was actually the opposite way, is that Hadassah was her real name, Esther was her nickname, and we call her Esther because she hid who she was during the story. Rabbi Nechemiah comes and says Hadassah was her name. Okay, so we have two for that. And why was she called Esther? And it says all people also called her after the goddess Ishtar. So for some, according to Rabbi Nechemiah, that she was being called Esther because of connecting to what was going on in the modern day, or their modern day, in connection to what was a popular name, and especially within her space and what she was able to do during her role. So we have these three ideas, whether it was that Esther was her given name, and then we change her name to show the attribute of righteousness, or maybe it is that Hadassah was her given name, and then Esther was because of the story that she comes to be part of hiding herself, hiding her identity in order to create change, or a greater change within the world, which then also can connect potentially to righteousness. Or it is just Hadassah's her name and we call her Esther, as similarly to how many people even today have an English name and have a Hebrew name, or a Hebrew name and an English name, and sometimes they go by one and sometimes they go by the other. So we can see a little bit that the rabbis do want to see her, Esther, as someone who is righteous and also someone whose story, who is a strong person within the storytelling, and so much so that even her name is going to reveal what this story is coming to teach us. So what else do the rabbis talk about Esther and her personality? So still on page 13a and Megillah. So it starts out, so as we see, sorry about that. The English should be cut out a little bit. So we're going to start where it says, Ben Azai said, Esther was neither tall nor short, but of medium size, like a myrtle. Yoshua ben Korcha said, Esther was green and there was an aura of kindness around her. Okay, so we have this very interesting idea that Esther was basically average looking, which then I find very surprising, because growing up, whenever I learned the story of Esther, especially as a kid, it was Esther was this beauty queen and she won the beauty pageant because she was the most gorgeous woman of all the lands. At least that's how my teachers used to teach it. But here it's very clear that she, at least according to Ben Azai, she was just normal. And she's this normal woman who was able to get into this space, which is actually quite remarkable. I think especially when I'm thinking of, I've been in a lot of conversations this week about International Women's Day and thinking about who are the women that we're looking up to. And in one of the events that I attended, it was really interesting to hear how many women in this space, did have some famous women that they looked up to, but so many women were talking about their mothers, their grandmothers, their sisters, their teachers, the woman who lives next door, the women who are doing just their normal everyday life, and how remarkable sometimes that really is, and how amazing that could be if we're looking around us and being able to see the amazingness in doing the ordinary. Yehoshua ben Korcha brings in this funny thing about Esther being green, but somehow this greenness is a positive attribute, because she is filled with kindness, and she has an aura of kindness that follows her and surrounds her. And I think that connects back up to this idea of her being righteous and her being good, and people just like her. There was a Midrash that I didn't bring that spoke that everyone who met Esther liked her, that she was able to fit into every society. Now, there was one interpretation of that she was able to shift into looking like everyone else, no matter where she was, so that everyone assumed that she was part of their nation. But in other ones, it was that she was able to talk to every person, no matter who they were, and to show them kindness and respect. And I think that's also a really important message to learn from Esther, of how are we bringing ourselves into multiple locations, into multiple spaces, and being able to show kindness and respect to every single person that we might be interacting with, in order to, especially in Esther's case, but I think in our case as well, of how do we work with everyone around us in order to reach the goal that we are trying to reach. And that's an important lesson. I know that I can definitely learn more from that. And I think that many people, as we're trying to shift and change. How old was Esther? Right, so this Midrash is also shocking to me, and this also comes back with, this idea of stories that I was taught way back when. So Rav said that Esther was 40 years old. I know I can't really see most people out there, but I would really love to see a hand raising of how many people imagined Esther to be 40 or 80 or 75. Which is awesome, right? I think this is also just an amazing message out there, that it's not, doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how young you are, you're still able to be doing amazing things in the world. And this is even more, I think, amazing to the rest of the story, skipping one ahead, of in the Gemara in Megillah, it says the sages taught there were 4 women of extraordinary beauty in the world: Sarah, Abigail, Rachav, and Esther. And this idea that Esther is, or was, one of the most beautiful women of the world, and she was still considered that, and potentially she was considered that still when she's 80 or 75, really has so much to teach us today, of how are we interacting with beauty? How are we, what does beauty mean? What does leadership look like? I saw an article, I think it's an article, that I don't know if this is something that's actually happening or someone wants this to happen, about the 50 women over 50 who are changing the world. That it's really amazing that we do the 36 under 36. We do these things for the younger generations, but who are all these women who are movers and shakers, who are over 50, that are no longer in the popular lists, and how important it is for all of humanity to be able to recognize the accomplishments regardless of one's age or gender. Oh, there is a chat. Oh. Right. So Esther is this potentially very average woman, potentially this extraordinarily beautiful woman, potentially this green woman who shows love and kindness. She's also known as a prophetess. She's one of the 7 prophetesses. That's a long word with a lot of S's. As we can see in Megillah, we have Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther, who are all those who are able to connect and interact with God and provide prophecy and create change within the communities. And we're going to read together the very last text that I have. Really shows the connection between Esther and God and the ways in which she was able to pray, and that is what was able to create the change. Okay. Does anyone so far have any questions?
Not a question.
Okay.
But just a comment that I, all of the things, just to reinforce what you said, all the things that we're taught as children about how she was the most beautiful and young and vibrant and, whatever it was, I guess us putting our 20th century, 21st century ideals of beauty on whatever it is that the king of Ahasuerus saw in Esther doesn't actually jive with what the Mefarshim describe about her, whether it's her looks or her age. And I think your point about how, women are valuable at every stage and every age resonates strongly, I know, with me and with so many other women who I cross paths with all the time.
Yeah, thanks. There are other stories within this page on 13a of sitting in oil for 12 months. That's what she was doing in before she was brought to Ahasuerus. They would sit in oil for 12 months and have spices and basically be in a spa for a really long time to look beautiful. But I think it's really an important thing to also recognize that she was also average, right? These things of how do we make ourselves feel beautiful, which I think is important, all the time. And it's not so much about someone else, but it's about myself. And that's not going to change her essence. It's not going to change her person if she sits in a vat of oil for a year. From Facebook, it's how Esther's age is totally unexpected is the opposite direction to that of Rebecca. I don't know if there's a way to address this in a Q&A. So meaning that, so I hope I'm understanding whoever this is from Facebook land, that the Midrash of Rebecca being 3 and getting married off, and Esther is, 70 or 80, and how are we holding those two, because they're really very shockingly different and not at all what we expect, and how to hold both of those numbers. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I'm also disturbed by the idea that Rivka could have or was 3 years old when she was married off. That is very disturbing to me. And also shocking to me still, even though I've heard that many times, of why would that be the first number that the rabbis thought of, or why was that the number that was passed down? I'm sorry. I don't have a good answer to that. But it is shocking. And I think it is, especially if you think about both of these together, that is also questionable. I hope that answered, or at least brought to light what you're feeling, whoever you might be. So we're going to continue on. So it's interesting so I read through the Gemara in Megillah 15a, and we have these 4 women, and they do say, they recognize that according to those who say that Esther was greenish in color or lacking natural beauty, they actually take Esther off this list and put Vashti in her place because she actually was beautiful. So that's just a very fascinating thing to hold on to and to know. But I do personally like this idea that Esther is seen as someone who has extraordinary beauty, and at the same time is someone who is seen as average looking, and how amazing that is to see average as beautiful and gorgeous. So here we have Esther and Mordechai. I'm scrolling down a little bit. So who was Esther and Mordechai? How did they interact with one another? So we hear that Mordechai took her as a daughter. The rabbis want to know, they say, well, you know, you're her uncle, what do you mean? And actually, I think this is a really also another beautiful lesson that we can learn from the Mefarshim on Esther, and this is from Agadot. And he says that as a daughter, was she a daughter or a niece, right? We're confused about that. This comes to teach us that all who raise an orphan, they're recognized as their child. And I do see this as a very beautiful idea that whatever children we might be raising, whether they're children that we birth or children that come into our households, however that might be, they are also our children and are seen, at least here with Mordechai and Esther, as daughter and father. There's also a beautiful Midrash, a little bit interesting and weird, of Rabbi Eryn taught that nursing, they didn't find Esther a nursemaid, right? So when she was born, her parents weren't alive and they needed to find a nursemaid, but they couldn't find one. And so Mordechai nursed her. So they did have, at least according to most of the rabbis, they had a very close and special bond. I guess also that would be true if they got married. But here it's very clear in these Midrashim that it was not a marriage relationship that they had, but rather a almost father-daughter relationship, and someone who deeply cared about her and took care of all of her needs. And we can see that continuing, if we see that as their relationship, we can see that very much throughout the story of Esther, of how much he is really trying to, or I can read into this as Mordechai really trying to make sure that Esther is doing well, is taking care of herself, but also there's this part where he's pushing her to do the best that she possibly can. Right? Trying to remind her that this is the reason potentially why you're here. And so you need to do these things. Even though they're scary, even though they're hard, I'm going to be here to support you. You tell me what I need to do, and I'm going to be standing by your side. And I think that's really a beautiful message, and thinking, again, with International Women's Day, of women able to stand up and do what they need to do, what they're able to do, and also relying on allies and people who are friends, standing on the side and pushing us and helping us and holding our hands, getting us to be into all the amazing places that all of us are capable and able to get to, even when it's really difficult. So this is a longer Midrash from Esther Rabbah. And this is going to go into all of what Esther was doing when after Mordechai came and explained to her that it was her duty to go and speak to Achashverosh, change the king's mind, even though it's going to be hard, and even though she might get killed for it, that it's her imperative to go. So Esther said in response to Mordechai, she said to him, "Go and gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days." And these are the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th of Nisan. Mordechai said to her, "Behold, in them is the first day of Pesach." Right? So how are we supposed to fast during these 3 days? It's supposed to be Pesach. We're supposed to have Seder. It's a Chag. She said to him, "The elder of Israel, what is Pesach for?" Immediately, Mordechai understood and conceded her words. That is, the meaning of that is written, Mordechai passed and did everything that Esther commanded. Right, so if we see that the holiday of Pesach is about redemption and freedom and leaving Egypt, and it is about this time of change. And so Mordechai understood this and then did everything Esther commanded. There they say that they passed the holiday of Pesach in a fast. And about that anguish, Mordechai prayed to the Lord and said, "It is revealed and known before you, the throne of glory, master of the worlds. That is not because of pride of heart and from a haughty eye that I did not bow down in front of Haman, but rather from your fear did I do this, not to bow down to him. And I was fearful in front of you to give your honor to flesh and blood, and I did not want to bow down before anyone besides you. As I who am not to bow down before Haman for the salvation of your people, Israel. For your sake, I would have licked the shoes of his feet. And now, our God, please save us from his hand, and let the fall in the pit that he has dug, and be trapped in the net, and the hid of your feet, your pious ones. And that this angered one should know that you have not forgotten your promise, that you promised us. And so with this, in their being in the land of the enemies, I will not reject them, and I will not abhor them to destroy them and rescind my covenant with them, as I am the Lord your God." And what did Mordechai do? He gathered the children, afflicted them from receiving bread and water, and clothed them with sackcloth, and sat on the dust, and they were calling out and crying, involved in Torah study. So we have the story, the idea of Mordechai. He called out to God. He was also sitting and praying and said, "I am doing this, everything out of my love and respect and in honor of you, because you have commanded me," and gathered everyone to fast and to pray with sackcloth and to study. At the same time, Esther was very scared because of the evil that had grown in Israel, and she took off the clothing of her royalty and splendor and wore sackcloth. And she uncovered the hair of her head and covered it with dust and ashes, and she afflicted herself with fasting. So again, she's gone through months of immersing herself in beautiful oils and beautiful smells, in learning how to bathe and put on makeup, and instead she takes off all of these things of royalty and wears uncomfortable clothing and makes her hair as messy as possible in mourning and in fear to pray to God, and she also is fasting. And she fell on her face in front of the Lord and prayed and said, "Lord God of Israel, who has ruled from the days of yore and created the world, please help your maidservant. As I was orphaned without a father or mother and incomparable to a poor woman who goes to beg from house to house, so do I beg you for your mercy from window to window in the house of Achashverosh. And now, Lord, please give your success to your maidservant, this poor woman, and the flock of your shepherding from these enemies that have risen against us. As you have no impediment from saving with the many or with the few, and you, O Father of orphans, please stand to the right of this orphan, who trusted in your kindness, and gave me mercy in front of this man as I feared him, and bring him low in front of me as you bring proud ones low." In Esther's prayer, she calls out to God, asking for his help and for God to remember that she is an orphan, and we know throughout the Torah and other rabbinic sources that God has a special place for those who are in need, especially those who are the widows and orphans. We read about that quite often. And she is calling out before God and humbling herself before God and calling out for mercy to help. And we know, that the end of the Megillah is that she does go over to Achashverosh. She is able to convince him to listen to what she has to say, and in the end, she is able to save the Jewish people from complete destruction. So it's here that we see also part of her righteousness and her also ability to use her strength and her power, not only to stand up for what she believes in to Achashverosh, but also to think strategically of how is she going to get Mordechai to do what she knows is right to be done. So although it might seem, at least in a bit of the story of Esther, that she's a little bit reluctant, when she starts thinking about that she actually has to do this, she is able to come up with a plan and come with reasoning and is able to work together with Mordechai. And I think it's a very nice model, at least based in this Midrash, of how she was able to work with Mordechai to get Mordechai to spread the word out. And with that, both were doing their parts in order to save the Jewish people. Her from the inside and him from the outside. I also have problems with, the very end, or it's like, oh, and Mordechai did all these things, and you're like, wait, where's Esther and all of this? But it is clear, at least here in this Midrash, that it was this tag team, that Mordechai and Esther were working together through the story. And if it wasn't for, I would argue that if it wasn't for one of the two of them praying, right? So if one of them didn't pray and one of them didn't do their actions, the story wouldn't have happened in the way that it did. So what can I learn from Esther? Esther's a cool woman. She is one of the few women who is known for her power, right? It's not something hidden. It's not her space is very public. But so I personally learned from her is the importance of working with other people. How are we talking to other people? How do I strategize with other people, knowing that even when I might potentially feel alone, those people who are reaching out to me and telling me that I'm not, I need to learn how to trust them. I think also seeing the depictions of her being both righteous, but also this very deep kindness that gets spread throughout many, many midrashim that I didn't bring. And it is also very important to remember of how do we stay kind and how do we stay controlled even when things might not be going in the ways that we want, even when we might feel hurt or scared. A beautiful midrash that I read was that Esther was also like the dawn. Just like the dawn, the sun comes creeping in and slowly, she starts out very slow. We don't really, she inches her way into all the story. And then when she gets into the right place at the right time, boom, the sun is there and it's shining. And Esther is getting what she wants and what she needs and is able to save. So learning how to take things in the right time and in the right space, to continue to be kind, and really this idea of knowing that no matter who we are, what we look like, whatever age we might be, we have the ability to take hold of the time that we are living because we are all in the right place at the right time, and we should be able to take those actions to create positive change in the world around us. Are there any questions or comments from anyone that's out there?
So one of the questions is, it's a question about the dates.
Yep.
If Purim is before Pesach, how could it be that Tanit Esther would have been ordered on Pesach? Because
it's the year before that she would. So sorry, I know that it was not. I like to talk with my hands. In my head, there was an image there, which I recognize is not in front of anyone else's face except for inside my brain. So I will use those. I will bring out words now. So according to many, the lottery was done before, like there was time before that it happened. So then it would have been the Pesach before the first Purim that they would have been fasting to create change, to see what they can do to get up the gumption. So we're a little bit different with the dates. Anyone else?
Helpful. No, like I said, you've given me a lot of food for thought and how I will think about Esther, both when I read the Megillah and when my kids come home from school with everything that they've learned about Megillat Esther. And as we go over what we've learned at the Suda, I'm gonna push on them a little harder with some of these texts. So on a personal level and a professional level, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
I really think that you've shed a lot of light and brought new information about Esther that people didn't know before. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you everyone everywhere for joining in. I hope you are all warm and safe and healthy. All those who need it, they should have a refuah shlema. And everyone should have a wonderful Shabbos, which is soon, and a really happy Purim, which is also soon.
Thank you. Chag Purim Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach. Bye.
Bye.